To the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on the conflict in Syria and Iraq and the threats that it poses to our national security? And what is the government's response to this threat, and there are other approaches to the measures?
I call the Foreign Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for right for this very serious question, because atrocities in Iraq and Syria continue unabated. 2 days ago, there were further reports that the terrorist organisation Daesh is using chemical weapons, this time mustard gas, in attacks on Kurdish forces in Syria. Now, systemic raping of women and the enslaving of children continues, as does Daesh's killing spree and forced conversion of members of religious minorities. There are now more than 20,000 terrorist foreign fighters in Syria and Iraq, including around 120 Australians. Australian extremists have been exploited by Daesh for propaganda and recruitment purposes, but are now also linked to planning terrorist plots in Australia. Reports that Australian foreign fighters are serving with Daesh's English-speaking unit, the so-called Anwar al-Awlaki Brigade, to orchestrate attacks on home soil are deeply disturbing. And, Mr Speaker, we make no mistake about this. This conflict poses a direct threat to Australia and its people. The Syrian government itself has perpetrated awful attacks against its own citizens overnight. Regime airstrikes against a market outside Damascus reportedly killed over 80 Syrian civilians. This is militarily, politically and strategically a complex theatre of war, and it is important that Australia presents a united front for these terrorist organisations, otherwise they will exploit any divisions within Australia. And that is why I was shocked to learn that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has broken ranks and is now attacking government policy on the fight against terrorism. In fact, she's had a go at the Leader of the Opposition on the way through.
Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Ballarat is warned. The member for McMahon. The member for McMahon. Members on my left will cease interjecting.
The member for Sydney wants Australia's Defence Forces to cease the airstrikes against Daesh, and she wants our fighter jets to drop food hampers over Syria. And guess who'll end up feasting on them? A terrorist
Members on my
picnic.
right.
Now, I know the Deputy Leader of the Opposition struggles with geography. She has said more than once that Africa
The Minister
is a
will resume
country.
her seat. The Minister will resume her seat. The member for Watson on a point of order. Those props are out of order. And the clerks will collect them.
Natasha.
I'm not hearing the member for Watson until interjection cease. The member for Kingston will cease interjecting. The member for Throsby will decide when the member for Watson gets the call. The member for Herbert is warned. The member for Herbert will remove himself under 94A. Are you up? Member for Watson. I call the Minister.
Now, I know the Deputy Leader of
Members
the
on my
Opposition
right
struggles
will
with
cease
geography.
the chatter.
She said more than once that Africa is a country. It's not. Now she has claimed that Syria is about the same size as Australia. Australia is 42 times larger than Syria. Now, if the Deputy Leader of the Opposition can't get basic facts right, if she thinks
the Minister will resume her seat. A point of order.
For the leadership jostling on the front bench of the government. But
The member for
Jellybrand,
there's no point of order. The member for Jellybrand will remove himself under 94A. It's a complete abuse of the standing orders. I call the Minister. The Treasurer will cease interjecting.
If the Deputy Leader of the Opposition thinks
Member
that
for
Daesh
Kingston is
can be
warned.
defeated by food, not force, let's hope that she never has anything to do with the planning of strategy
The
in this
Minister will
country.
resume her seat. Her time has expired. The member for Kennedy, who missed his call earlier, has the call now. Member for Kennedy, your time
When it
starts
came into
now.
office in 2007, Labor slashed 75% of
Member for
dispatched
Lilly.
funds that were committed to continuing the trade negotiations with China. The Leader of the Opposition is now in lockstep with Labor's union masters, who are running a campaign of economic treason against our nation's interests by making dishonest and untrue statements about China's free trade agreement, directly undermining Australian jobs and Australia's future prosperity. It is astonishing to see a Labor leader campaigning against jobs and against the national interest, and he should be condemned for his failure to stand up against the militant union bosses who put their self-interest ahead of the interests of their workers. The China Free Trade Agreement is about jobs for Australians. Why is Labor against jobs? The Coalition support jobs through the Free Trade Agreement, jobs for Australians. Labor opposes them.
Members cease interjecting. I can give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
To the Prime Minister.
Speaker, my question.
Last year the Prime Minister promised to retain labour market testing. So can the Prime Minister explain why the Memorandum of Understanding between the Chinese and Australian governments on his new investment facilitation arrangement states, and I quote, there will be no requirement for labour market testing to enter into an IFA?
Call the Prime Minister.
Subsequently says before anyone's
because the Treasurer will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Because it goes on to say that there will be labour market testing before people are actually employed.
That's right.
It goes on to say that there will be labour market testing before people are actually employed. Now, you know, this...
Members on my left and right will cease interjecting.
From a shadow foreign minister who thinks Africa is a country, this from a shadow foreign minister who wants to create a terrorist picnic in Syria by dropping food parcels. She does not understand this agreement which is absolutely vital for the future of our country. Now, I say I have a very simple challenge. A very simple challenge for the opposition. A very simple challenge. Do you support the China Free Trade Agreement? A very simple challenge. Do you support the China Free Trade Agreement? When President Xi was in this chamber, they supported the China Free Trade Agreement. Do they support it now, or is yet again this Leader of the Opposition being utterly two-faced?
Member for Ballarat.
Two-faced.
Member for Ballarat.
He says one thing in one context, a different thing in another context. He doesn't have the guts to tell President Xi that he's ripping off Australia. Now, he is trying to say to the CFMEU, go for it. Go for it, CFMEU. Well, the campaign from the CFMEU is a campaign of racist lies, and the Leader of the Opposition should be man enough to disown it.
I call the member for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table the document.
Is leave granted? Leave's not granted. I call the member for Grey. Those on my left will cease interjecting. Member for Members cease interjecting. I can give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister outline the exact process and timeline the government took in appointing Dyson Hayden as Royal Commissioner?
Members on my right will cease interjecting. Members on my right will cease interjecting before I call the Prime Minister. The member for Sydney will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I certainly can inform the member who asked the question that Dyson Hayden has a marvellous record as a judge of the New South Wales Court of Appeal. He was appointed by the Labor government of New South Wales. He was appointed by the Labor Attorney-General of New South Wales to be a judge of the Court of Appeal. And yes, he was appointed by the Howard government to be a judge of the High Court. But Dyson Hayden has served with great distinction as a judge. He has served with great distinction as a judge and he is doing valuable and necessary work as a Royal Commissioner into union corruption. He is doing valuable and necessary work.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Griffith on a point of order.
Yes, on direct relevance, to be relevant, the Prime Minister
those
needs
on my
to
right,
address
the member
the question.
for Dobell will leave the chamber under 94A. The member for Griffith. Member for Griffith on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be relevant, the Prime
member
Minister.
for Adelaide will cease interjecting. She's been warned twice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be
member
relevant.
for Perth. You're interrupting the member for Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To be relevant, the Prime Minister needs to come to the issue of how Mr. Hayden was appointed to the present Royal Commission. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister's only just begun his answer. It was a question. I'd like to address this without interjection from either side. It was a question that I considered not allowing, given that no minister would carry every single detail with them. But I allowed the question for the Prime Minister to address it. You'll cease interjecting. No, you'll cease interjecting. The member for Gorton will leave under 94A. He's been warned 3 times. You've decided to eject yourself. The Prime Minister will come back to the answer and address the question. The Prime Minister.
Now, the Honourable Dyson Hayden, ACQC, is doing very valuable work, pointing out the. Now, let's.
The member for Lily will cease interjecting.
Let's understand what members opposite are saying here. Members opposite are trying to suggest that because Dyson Hayden ACQC agreed to go to a Liberal event, not a fundraiser, but a networking event.
Members on my left.
Once he was no longer a Royal Commissioner, somehow he did the wrong thing. That's it, is it? That's it. OK.
Members on my left.
Well,
the member for Wannon and the member for Bass are warned.
Michael.
The member for Kingsford Smith.
OK. They agree. That's the charge against ex-Justice Dyson Hayden. All right. All right. Michael Kirby addressed the Society of Labor Lawyers while a judge of the New South Wales Court of Appeal. Mary Gaudron addressed the Society of Labor Lawyers while a High Court judge. Michael McHugh addressed the Society of Labor Lawyers while on the New South Wales Court of Appeal. Did any of them do anything wrong? No, they did not. Did any of that attack their integrity?
Members on my
or
right.
impugn their integrity? No, it did not.
The member for Barker. The member for Lily is warned.
Now,
the Treasurer.
Now, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Lawler.
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister has the call.
In November last year,
the member for Deakin will leave under 94A.
A serving New South Wales judge agreed to deliver
the
Frank
Adelaide.
Walker Memorial Lecture for the New South Wales Society of Labor Lawyers. The only people who have done anything wrong here are members opposite who are smearing a decent man to cover up.
The member for Melbourne Ports, you've been warned twice. That's your last warning. It's your last warning.